Putin's spring offensive isn't going to plan, and that is putting it mildly. What is supposed to be Russia's final push to take the Donbas has morphed into something very different. Ukraine is taking everything back. This is de-Russification in action, and it's not Russia that is making the final push, it's Ukraine. The total liberation of the Ukrainian nation has begun, and Putin isn't ready for the all-out offensive that is coming his way. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Early March saw the beginning of Russia's grand offensive, which Putin designed specifically to finally topple the last remaining standout settlements in Luhansk and, more importantly, cripple the Donetsk fortress belt that stands in the way of Russia and complete control of the Donbas. Russia built up tens of thousands of soldiers. Putin claimed to have reserves, and all of the Russian propaganda pointed to the inevitable fall of one of the most important Ukrainian regions. If you listen to Putin, you'd think the collapse of the Donbas was inevitable. It isn't. Despite Putin's bluster, Russia's spring offensive has been an unmitigated disaster that is achieving the precise opposite of what it was designed to do. It isn't Russia that is gaining territory. It's Ukraine liberating vast swathes of land. The April numbers are in, and they look terrible for Putin. April 2026 has seen Russia record its first net territorial loss since August 2024. Those with long memories will recall that August 2024 was when Ukraine launched its blistering counteroffensive into Russia's Kursk region, through which it took control of over 1,000 square kilometers or around 386 square miles of Russia. What we're seeing now isn't quite as dramatic in terms of the numbers of where Ukraine is attacking, but it is crucial. Why? Well, rather than taking control of Russian territory, Ukraine is liberating its own, and it's doing it to an impressive degree. In April, Ukraine outpaced Russia to the tune of 116 square kilometers or 44.7 square miles of territory. That's according to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which highlights how Russia's spring offensive has devolved into Putin's forces dealing with a host of negative battlefield dynamics that are causing them to spiral. This hasn't come out of nowhere. March wasn't much better for the Russians. The month the spring offensive started saw Russia achieve close to zero net gains across 31 days of fighting. The ISW reports that Russia only managed to take 23 square kilometers or 8.9 square miles of Ukraine in March, and it seems likely that it has lost all of that territory and more in April. What we're seeing here is a complete turnaround in operational tempo that is happening at the worst possible time for Putin. Contrast today's figures to those from 2025. According to the Kyiv Post, Russia's forces were capturing about 12.9 square kilometers or around 5 square miles of Ukraine every day in March 2025. So 2 days of fighting in March 2025 would have given Russia more territory than an entire month of fighting during March 2026. That's not a good look for Putin. And now we see Russia achieving a net territorial loss for April. It's clear that momentum is shifting. De-Russification of Ukraine is now happening at a rate of about 3.87 square kilometers or 1.5 square miles every single day, the Kyiv Post reports. How on earth has this happened? The spring was supposed to be the start of the inevitable Russian victory. What is happening right now has caught everybody off guard, barring Ukraine, which had been preparing for this all along. A combination of Ukrainian brilliance and Russian incompetence has led to Ukraine's startling results, and we'll be digging into both, but first, there's one more thing to cover: Russia's losses. They are staggering. We already have the numbers for Russia's catastrophic march. They were record-breaking, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed. Putin churned through 35,351 of his soldiers to make practically no gains in March, which was over 350 troops more than the 35,000 casualties suffered in December 2025, which previously held Russia's grimmest Ukraine war record. The numbers aren't in for April yet. Ukraine is still tabulating them, but if April 29th is anything to go by, we're going to see something similar to go alongside Russia's scoring its first net territorial loss since 2024. On April 29th, Russia lost 1,470 of its soldiers, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reports. Multiply that number by 30 and you get a monthly total of 44,100. It's just getting worse for Putin. His spring offensive has practically collapsed before it managed to get off the ground, and Ukraine is taking advantage. According to the Kyiv Post, March saw Ukraine liberate nearly 50 square kilometers or 20 square miles of its territory. Gains in February and late January amounted to 480 square kilometers or 185 square miles. Add the net gain for April, and it's clear that Ukraine is in the ascendancy. And this isn't Ukraine taking back empty farmland or pointless territory. The Ukrainian counterpush is measured, precise, and it targets key locations that disrupt Russian logistics and maneuvers all across the front. Ukraine's April 2026 result wasn't a one-off. It's part of a pattern that has defined the entire year. Russia boasts, but it's Ukraine that is making all of the positive battlefield moves. Ukraine is on an all-out offensive that is destroying every plan that Putin made for 2026. But we come back to the question of how this is happening. Russian propaganda indicated that it was Putin's forces in the ascendancy leading into 2026. Coincidentally, that propaganda ramped up in December, which was right around the time that Putin was gearing up to make his case in another round of peace talks. But for all of the propaganda, we're now seeing the opposite of what Russia said would happen. Why? Well, Ukraine has a huge part to play, of course, and we'll be getting to that. But perhaps the biggest issue for Russia is that 2026 is laying Putin's strategic incompetence bare. Right now, we're seeing a broad slowdown in the Russian offensive across the entire front line. That slowdown has been happening for a long time, as the ISW reports. The Russian rate of advance across the battlefield has been steadily declining since November 2025, as continued Ukrainian ground counterattacks, Ukrainian mid-range strikes, the February 2026 block on Russia's use of Starlink terminals in Ukraine, and the Kremlin's throttling of Telegram have exacerbated existing problems within the Russian military, the institute says. Indeed, we've seen that slowdown in real time. Back in November 2025, Russia was slow, but it still managed to seize about 575 square kilometers, or around 222 miles, of Ukraine. December saw a drop of around 40 or 50 square kilometers, or about 15.4 to 19.3 square miles. Since then, Russia's advance has been in free fall in terms of its monthly numbers, all leading up to April 2026 and its first net territorial loss since August 2024. A large part of the reason why this is happening is that Russia has simply failed to adapt to conditions on the ground in Ukraine. The winter of 2025 and into 26 was a little colder and significantly wetter than the winter of the previous year, the ISW points out. And that has resulted in March and April being exceptionally muddy, as a combination of spring rains and defrosting ground creates a sort of soupy terrain. Russia has responded to this the only way that Putin knows how: throw more meat and metal at Ukraine. It's going about as well as you might expect. We've seen what's happening to the meat as Ukraine logs record casualties against Russia's forces. The metal, or Russia's mechanized units, are practically useless. Tanks and armored vehicles can barely move through the sloppy Ukrainian ground, which has prevented Russia from providing fire support to its soldiers or protection to those it's tasking with assaults. When the mud takes hold of an armored vehicle, a Russian soldier isn't told to hold back until conditions improve. They get out of their vehicle and march through the mud until a Ukrainian drone inevitably finds and eliminates them. It's the same old story from Putin that we've seen throughout the war. Human wave assaults backed by artillery and glide bombs seem to be all that Russia really has in its locker, and the strategy is becoming ever less effective as Ukraine's drone-infested kill zones expand and Russia's infiltration tactics are turned on their head. But the real problem for Russia is this: it can't keep up with what it's trying to do in Ukraine right now, and that's a key reason why the de-Russification is going so well. Lies spread by his generals and a falling appetite for war in his country are combining to thwart Putin's plans. But a quick side note before we dig into that: you're watching The Military Show, and we bring you the reality behind the headlines. Hit subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the curve. Russia's liars, generals, are trying to hide everything that's happening. They've crafted an alternative reality where Russia is in the ascendancy, and the craziest thing about this is that Putin probably believes them. Russia's president is a man who punishes those who tell him things he doesn't want to hear, which has resulted in his creation of a group of toadies who lie to him just to ensure they're not the next crony who takes an unexpected fall out of a Russian window. Chief among Russia's spin doctors is Valery Gerasimov, who is the chief of the General Staff of Russia's armed forces. On April 21st, AA reported on Gerasimov's claims that Russia has taken control over 80 Ukrainian settlements and 1,700 square kilometers, or 656 square miles, of Ukraine's territory. March and April certainly weren't months of no net gains followed by severe net losses, Gerasimov added. Oh no, Russia was still gaining ground during those months. 34 Ukrainian settlements and 700 square kilometers, or 270 square miles, had been captured during the first couple of months of Russia's spring offensive, Gerasimov claimed. Russia's chief of the general staff was lying. Whether that was to fool those outside of Russia or to save his own skin is yet to be determined. Putin will be happy to wallow in the alternate reality his generals are creating because what's actually happening is far from what he wants to hear. The net territorial losses and de-Russification of so much of Ukraine's territory are bad enough, but think about what Putin's antiquated tactics need to have any chance of succeeding: manpower. You can't have a meat grinder strategy if you don't have any meat to feed into the grinder. On top of everything that is going wrong for Russia right now, the fact that it isn't recruiting enough soldiers to sustain the spring offensive that is already falling apart may be the worst thing of all. The UK's Ministry of Defence has already highlighted what's happening on the Russian recruitment front, as it says that March marked the 4th consecutive month that Russia lost more soldiers than it was able to recruit. Uncoincidentally, that would mean December was the start of the shortfall, which also just happens to be the same month where Russia's territorial gains started the free fall that has led them into the situation where Ukraine is the nation pushing forward and claiming land. The Kyiv Post goes a little deeper. It points out that Russia plans to recruit 409,000 contract soldiers by the end of 2026, but it isn't getting anywhere close to that target. Russia is recruiting an average of 1,120 soldiers per day, which is just barely covering a daily casualty rate that typically lands between 1,000 and 1,200, and as we saw on April 29th, can climb much higher. At its current rate of recruitment, Russia is going to be short of its target by thousands of soldiers by the end of 2026. Plus, Ukraine isn't going to rest on its laurels. Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov has set a target of 50,000 Russian casualties per month by the end of 2026. If Ukraine hits that target, Russia's faltering recruitment will be compounded by more losses on the battlefield. Soon it won't just be net territory losses that Russia will have to worry about, it will be net soldier losses. And Russia's army is getting weaker in other ways. Putin doesn't look for talent when he assigns his generals. He looks for subservience combined with a willingness to be as corrupt as you need to be to survive in the twisted structure of the Russian military. This incompetence, though not the corruption, carries over to the soldiers on the ground. Ivan, who was a Russian recruit who ended up getting sent to the front, outlined Russia's training process for its new soldiers to United 24 media in February. After all the medical checkups, they asked me if I was ready to go to the military base the day after tomorrow. They trained us for 5 days. We waited for another 5 days for a force rotation, and then we went to combat positions. Medical plus 10 days of preparation. That's what a Russian soldier gets before they're flung out to the front to try to make the gains Putin wants. But as Putin languishes in the lies told by his generals and the continued weakening of his own military, Russia is losing ground in Ukraine. Of course, it's not just Russian incompetence that's playing a role here. Ukraine is more than holding up its end when it comes to taking advantage of the situation ahead of it and adapting its tactics to achieve de-Russification of so much of its territory. The ISW highlighted 3 major plus points in Ukraine's military campaign: drones, the ground offensive, and taking advantage of Russia's comms situation. We're going to add another, so stick around to find out what that is, but let's start with drones. They are the key to everything for Ukraine. Specifically, Ukraine has added middle-range drones to its arsenal over the last couple of months, and they are having a devastating effect. These drones, which fly further than the FPV drones on the front but cost less and don't have the range of the long-range drones being sent into Russia, are devastating Putin's rear. Flying as far as 200 kilometers or 124 miles behind the Russian front, these drones are smashing Russian logistics and destroying air defenses, the latter of which opens up more assaults deeper into the rear. Russia's supplies are being held up or destroyed. Command posts are falling to these drones, and the effect on the front is clear, as an already dysfunctional military is getting fractured. Strikes against Russia's air defenses in the occupied territories also open the door for long-range drones to take out Russian oil and military infrastructure, which only further weakens Putin's forces. Throw Ukraine's FPV drones and ground robots operating on the front lines into the mix, and you get a lethal cocktail. The Kyiv Post reports that 96% of Russian casualties are now being inflicted by drones. That's tens of thousands of Russians eliminated every month, without even getting a sniff of a fight against an actual Ukrainian soldier. It's meat versus machine, and there's only ever going to be one winner in that type of fight. Ukraine's cast kill zones stretch deeper and wider than they ever have before, and Russia is smashing its own teeth against them. Not that Ukraine's soldiers aren't doing anything. When mechanized assaults get mired in the Ukrainian muck, Putin resorts to sending tiny infiltration units behind the Ukrainian lines. Those units are vital for Russia's propaganda. People like Gerasimov come up with their inflated figures by counting territory where 1 or 2 Russian soldiers are hiding desperately while they wait for backup as captured. Ukraine has gotten wise to these tactics and has created seek-and-destroy units that operate in grey zones to wipe out the Russian infiltrators. These units are being supported by Ukraine's middle-range strikes. If Russia is being wrecked in the rear, it can't send the supplies and soldiers needed to build on what its infiltrators achieve. So So the infiltrators get taken out, never having received the support they were supposed to receive. Again, Russia's military gets weakened. Then there's Russia's communication situation. That's been a nightmare ever since SpaceX shut down Russia's access to Starlink, which Putin's forces had due to their access to illicit terminals. In the wake of that shutdown, Starlink data traffic dropped by a staggering 75%, Militani reported on March 12th. That, more than any other figure, shows you how reliant Russia was on this tech. Now it's gone, mostly. Some Russian units are still able to get their hands on working Starlink terminals, as Russian Life reports. But like the Russian army itself, this access is fractured and nowhere near wide-ranging enough to be effective outside of small pockets of the front lines. Throw Putin's campaign against Telegram into the mix, and Russia's soldiers have run out of modern communications options with nothing to replace them. And that brings us to the fourth plus point in Ukraine's offensive campaign that is leading to the sorts of results we saw in April: active defense. This is the new Ukrainian strategy for 2026, and it amounts to using precision to take advantage of Russian weakness. Everything that Ukraine is doing forces Russia to react, to shift reserves and make changes to its approach that don't come fast enough. Gaps are created for Ukraine to exploit. Ukraine defends stubbornly where it needs to, and it strikes Russia where Putin's forces are at their weakest and least prepared. Ukraine is bolstering this strategy by taking the opposite approach to Russia in terms of military structure. As the Russian military becomes more fractured and places less emphasis on training, Ukraine is increasing the time spent on training and reorganizing its military to ensure unit cohesion. Ukraine is also reducing its dependency on military aid by building a flourishing defense industry focused on building the equipment it needs to execute on its strategy. We're not seeing a grand and sweeping counteroffensive by Ukraine. That's not what active defense is all about. What we see on the battlefield is a series of calculated strikes, be that by middle-range drones in the Russian rear, long-range drones in Russia itself, or troops on the ground taking out Russian positions, that have a cumulative effect. Russia's military is being constantly disrupted and discombobulated. Ukraine is hitting all of the right pressure points, and it's only going to get better as its units become more cohesive on the battlefield. The early results are in. Russia is dealing with record losses and its first net territory loss in almost 2 years. Putin doesn't know it yet, but Russia is losing the war. The tide has turned as the man who can do nothing but rely on tactics that clearly aren't working anymore has no answer for Ukraine. There will be more drones, more death, more losses. Even the warmer months that will come in late spring and into the summer aren't going to save Russia now, as the de-Russification of Ukraine is underway. Russia's military is being systematically dismantled, and the spring offensive has fallen apart in record time. And somehow it's getting worse for Putin. While liberating territory on the mainland is Ukraine's priority, it hasn't forgotten about Crimea. Illegally occupied since 2014, the peninsula is being subjected to its own long-term de-Russification. Ukraine is isolating Crimea. It's attacking supply lines, ships, military equipment, and logistical hubs, all in preparation for the destruction of the one thing that allows Putin to maintain his grip on the peninsula. If you want to find out more, make sure you watch our video covering the situation in Crimea right now. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you never miss any of our coverage of the latest Ukraine war developments. And thank you for watching.